Welcome to R&R Living Life. There was so much to see around Carnarvon, so we begin this episode taking a walk along the old tram track towards the 1 Mile jetty. The track connects the footbridge on the fascine town beach to the Carnarvon Heritage Precinct, which we did not walk all the way to. It was interesting following the original tramway, where trains once transported supplies between the Carnarvon goods shed, now the Carnarvon Civic Centre, with the historic 1 Mile jetty. The jetty was built in 1897, while the tramway was constructed during the 1900s. We had been walking over the huge Gascoyne River, named by the explorer George Grey in 1839 in honour of his friend Captain Gascoyne, with an abundance of mangroves where this intertidal area was full of marine life and migratory birds. Babbage and Whitlock Islands are part of the Gascoyne River Delta. The delta has been formed by soil carried from lands many kilometres inland by the river and deposited here in the delta, where the river meets the sea. The catchment starts about 760 kilometres inland near Meekatharra and Newman in the Robinson Ranges, west of the Gibson Desert, draining 8 million hectares of land, with the last 300-kilometre tongue of the river, sand, that acts as a huge water storage system, with the water table or the river's aquifers lying below the desert sands, the only place in Australia where the desert reaches out into the sea. Wooden barrages have been built on Babbage Island along the mouth of the Gascoyne River to slow the flow of water in the river and to help prevent erosion of the river's banks. On returning from our walk, we made our way out to Pelican Point, where Pelican Point Beach occupies the 4-kilometre long western shore of Babbage Island and is the main town beach. The island has been built by low waves reworking the river sand into a 4-kilometre long west to southwest facing beach and island, with a small jetty to service an oil terminal located in the middle of the island. From Pelican Point we drove out to the Carnarvon Heritage Precinct that comprises the 1 Mile jetty, the Lighthouse Keeper's Cottage Museum, the Shearers Hall of Fame and the Railway Station Museum, where we wandered the sights and strolled along the walking path that led us out to the lookout over the Gascoyne River, past the memorial statue, Don't Look at the Islands, dedicated to those Aboriginal people sent to Bonilla and Dory Islands in the early 1900s, and further on to the site of the old Carnarvon meatworks, which is an interesting story in itself, being once the holding area for sheep and cattle being exported from Carnarvon. Sadly, only the foundations remain. As the pastoral industry developed in Carnarvon in the late 1800s, the local population requested the government of the day to develop a port for the town. By 1897 the jetty had been built, and wool and livestock produced in the region began to be exported to Fremantle, and essential goods for the town were imported using state shipping. In 1904 the head of the jetty was added to, and in 1912 the jetty head was widened because of increasing traffic, including passengers. Carnarvon was the first port in Western Australia which loaded livestock on board ships for transport to markets. The 1 Mile jetty once boasted an animal race the length of a jetty, along which the sheep and cattle were driven from holding yards where the interpretive centre is today. The jetty transport system and diesel locos on the tramway ceased in 1966 when state ships stopped calling. Once road transport commenced, the jetty began to fall in disrepair until 1998, when it was saved as a tourist attraction. Then, in 2021, it was badly damaged by Cyclone Seroja and is currently closed. The Railway Station Museum houses the Kimberley steam train, the last steam train to operate in the northwest. The Shearing Hall of Fame is a collaboration with the Gascoyne Pastoral and Shearing Museum to highlight the golden days of the Gascoyne shearing industry during the 1950s. The Lighthouse Keeper's Cottage, built around the 1900s to house the lighthouse keeper and his family and used until the 1970s, contained memorabilia from bygone days. The cottage is a reminder of days when the shipping of wool, cattle and people by coastal steamer had become big business by the 1890s in the northwest, with Carnarvon a major port for the Gascoyne region. The old water tank that was used to water stock held in the stockyards, as well as providing water for the steam trains that hauled wool bales from town to the 1 Mile jetty for export, still stands. The 1 Mile Jetty Centre is home to the HMAS Sydney 2 and the HSK Cormorant Battle, with many interactive displays giving a great insight into the devastating events that occurred back in 1941. There were so many great displays, documentaries and collections to view in the centre, well worth a visit. Overnight we had about 10 mils of rain, making everything look so fresh. We began our day with a drive out through the salad bowl along the Gascoyne River, where the first recorded appearance of bananas in Australia in the early to mid-1800s occurred, when it is thought that Chinese immigrants brought them from China. The alluvial soils along the banks of the Gascoyne are loamy fine sands or silty loams, well drained and alkaline and highly fertile. Irrigated agriculture began almost from the time of settlement, growing mostly bananas and vegetables. After World War I, the Soldier Settlement Scheme was established for tropical agriculture. The serious drought year of 1935 led to the discovery of the water supply in aquifers beneath the riverbed, firmly establishing the horticultural industry in Carnarvon. From the salad bowl, we made our way about 75 kilometres north to visit the awe-inspiring blowholes, situated along the Quoba coastline, where the powerful ocean swells are forced through sea caves and up out of narrow holes in the rocks, creating jets of water that erupt into the air. It was a spectacular sight where Mother Nature's power was evident. While just south of the blowholes at Point Quoba was the calm coral-filled lagoon with fish and shells in abundance and a white sandy beach. The day was overcast and we spent much of the time dodging showers, not just the spray from the ocean that was being blown inland as it was very windy, but it was well worth it. Although the coast is often serene and yet rugged, it can be deadly, with a dangerous swell that can turn into king waves, capable of crashing over the top of the rock ledge, hence the sign at the turn-off. From the blowholes, we travelled north along the rugged coastal cliffs, where waves crashed on shore, sending sea spray into the air and in places over the boat. We were interested in seeing the HMAS Sydney 2 Memorial, serving as a monument to the 645-strong crew lost during the battle between HMAS Sydney 2 and the German raider Cormorant off Carnarvon on the 19th of November 1941. The site is where the survivors from the Cormorant first came ashore in their life rafts after both ships were destroyed within a half-hour's confrontation. The absence of Australian survivors has left many questions on the precise circumstances of the loss, which continues to arouse controversy to this day. In the distance we could see Bullara Station, a working pastoral station on the southern tip of the Ningaloo Marine Park, where at the time of the naval battle the owner, Neil Baston, played a role in arresting the Cormorant survivors. By November the 26th, 103 survivors were rounded up on Bullara Station and imprisoned in the Carnarvon jail until being taken to Perth or Melbourne as prisoners of war. Before leaving the blowholes, we made our way up a very steep and rutted road to Point Quoba Lighthouse, with spectacular views along the coastline. The tower stands about 11 metres high and is just over 3.5 metres in diameter. Until 1948, Point Quoba was also known as Point Charles, and so as not to be confused with Point Charles in the Northern Territory, the name was changed when the lighthouse was originally constructed in 1950. with an acetylene light and various elements of other lighthouses, with the lantern and stairs from Point Clotes and the original lantern built in the 1860s from the Cape Wickham Lighthouse in Tasmania. Quoba Lighthouse is a wonderful example of how various elements of a lighthouse can be recycled. The unmanned lighthouse was fitted with a sun valve to automatically light and extinguish the lamp that was powered by acetylene. Before the lighthouse could be constructed, though, a road had to be built to the site, approximately 75 kilometres northwest of Carnarvon. On our way out to the blowholes, we had passed Beta Nutrition, an interesting project about 2/3 of the way to the blowholes, where they grow single-cell algae in very salty ponds and then harvest it and extract the beta-carotene, which is on-sold to a number of different manufacturing industries as both a colorant and a nutritional supplement. The ponds have ideal growing conditions to develop the biomass required for the algae to replicate by dividing and multiplying in water that is about 6 times the salt concentration of the ocean. The beta-carotene in its pure form is a little crystal. What a day it had been, even though we had been dodging showers on and off throughout the day. It had been interesting to learn how many German ships were in Australian waters during the Second World War, and just how far south along both the east and west coast they had come, as was the horrendous bombing of Darwin, and if I remember correctly, Broome. Not something we had ever learnt in our history lessons. There was so much history that is never shared until you come and see for yourself. I have learnt so much from the signage placed around sites and places we have visited and found interesting. Driving along the rugged coastline with the waves crashing in from the Indian Ocean against the shoreline was impressive, and I am thankful it wasn't during rougher weather. Just how far inland some of the blowholes, crevices, fault lines and underwater caves are that have been created in the sandstone and limestone with shells and coral fragments is something we did not find out. But it could be just a few metres, or it could be kilometres until someone stumbles upon them. To think that the ocean has impacted so much of this coastline. The water level, waves and currents interact with outcrops of coastal limestone and coral reefs to modify the inshore processes, including sediment transport and water circulation patterns that cause these sea caves. The coastline along this part of Western Australia was next level. The road so close to the cliff edge in places. Mother Nature again at her best. The following day was a rest day where we caught up on the odd jobs around Gidget and the boat, making sure everything was ship-shape for the next leg of our journey to Bullara Station stay, where we were planning to stay for a couple of days. We had just under 300 kilometres to go today, heading north along the northwest coastal highway on the western edge of Lake McLeod, that lies about 30 kilometres north of Carnarvon. The marine salt lake and complex wetland system that incorporates a number of different wetland types, including sinkholes, channels, lakes and marshes that are permanently inundated due to a subterranean connection with the ocean. The lake system stretches over 110 kilometres, known for its vibrant pink colour, and is surrounded by breathtaking landscapes including red sand dunes and rocky outcrops. The main lake bed, unique in Australia, is primarily fed by surface water and inundated only following heavy rain in the catchment. The lake sits within the Carnarvon Basin, a sedimentary basin formed during the Jurassic period, now a haven for a diverse range of flora and fauna. The lake provides a habitat for several species of birds, including pelicans, black swans, and various species of wading birds, a variety of reptiles, with vegetation adapted to the harsh desert environments, helping to stabilise the soil and prevent erosion. We continued on through some interesting, rugged, untouched, and what appeared to be untamed country. There were long, straight, undulating sections. Then we were crossing sand ridges with plains of buffel grass between the ridges. Out the passenger window were red sand ridges for kilometres, while out the driver's side the ridges were much further away, until about 30 kilometres from Manelia Bridge and Roadhouse. Long floodways greeted us as we drove closer to Manelia Roadhouse, with the floodway signs up to 4 metres. The amount of water through this area would be massive. Once we had crossed the Tropic of Capricorn, the sign that didn't coincide with the map, the country became flatter downs country, then sand ridges and spinifex country with huge termite mounds. I was surprised by how green the spinifex country was, much of it having been recently burnt with new regrowth. The sheer vastness of the outback seemed to be coming alive with the green regrowth against the red, undulating sand country as far as the eye could see, with the natural vegetation in the area consisting of spinifex, wattle, and poverty bush shrub varieties, interspersed with seeded buffel. It was such an interesting and enjoyable leg of our journey. Carnarvon and the area north we had been travelling through had such interesting topography, being that the Gascoyne region was characterised by an extreme tidal range, leaving the coast surrounded by mangroves and mudflats. We were now travelling through an area on the Tropic of Capricorn, with vastly different country, albeit sand ridges and spinifex country as far as the eye could see. We had left behind the salt marshes with samphire, a group of succulent plants that tolerate high levels of salinity, that are present closer to the river mouth and in the isolated salt pans we had passed on our way to the blowholes. The area we were now travelling through was so very different to where we had previously been over the past couple of days. For me, who was used to country on the tablelands in the Territory and country in Western Queensland, find it surprising that people make a living from what appeared to be such a harsh environment, but I am sure they love what they are doing and wouldn't change it. Like all pastoralists having to rely on Mother Nature, who dictates what the weather and landscape provides, makes life difficult at the best of times, but also interesting. We arrived at Bullara Station, a working cattle station, mid-afternoon, where we set up and enjoyed the rest of the afternoon being entertained by an acquisitive little birds, and not to forget the multitude of flies. Join us next time as Rick takes me on a breathtaking, heart-pounding drive along a razor-backed ride to Charles Knife Canyon in the Cape Range. I hope you have enjoyed this episode. Give us a thumbs up if you did. Take care and stay safe. Cheers for now. Rick and Rosemary. R&R, Livin' Life.